All right, we're going to go ahead and get started since it's noon. Good afternoon. My name is Adam Murray. I have the privilege of being the Chief Executive Officer at Inner City Law Center. I want to welcome you all to the second of Inner City Law Center's on-the-ground conversations. These are opportunities for us to share in a bit deeper dive way some aspects of our work and explore some particular aspect of our work for how we tackle homelessness in Los Angeles. Today, we are lucky to have a number of attorneys from Inner City Law Center who work with our benefits advocacy team with us. And the issue we're going to explore is the work that Inner City Law Center does to help folks who are homeless or very precariously housed and struggling with disabilities to access Social Security disability benefits or Social Security benefits that will enable them over time to have housing stability that they otherwise would not be likely to have. So before I introduce our fabulous panelists, I want to just mention that there are two ways that you can participate in the conversation today. One is that if you click on the chat function on your Zoom screen, you can feel free to add a comment. We would love to have you comment on what you're hearing, to hear about your personal experience. You can comment on whether or not you like my tie, whatever you want to comment on, just as we go through the program. And then secondly, there's also, you'll see on your screen, a Q&A button that you can click on. And that's an opportunity for you to ask a question if you have something that you would like to hear an answer to. So we're lucky to have Jin Lee, who's one of our supervising attorneys on this project, answering those questions throughout the course of the program. So you will likely get a written answer there. But we will also hopefully have some time at the end of our program to talk about some of those questions, assuming that everything goes according to schedule and to plan. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our three fabulous panelists, and their bios are going to be in the chat. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm just going to tell you what their role is at Inner City Law Center, and then we're going to jump right in. But we have one of our senior staff attorneys at Inner City Law Center, Lily Yan, with us. We have one of our supervising attorneys, Rutzick, and one of our directing attorneys, Rebecca Watson. And all three of these attorneys serve on our benefits advocacy team. And I am going to try to not speak a lot in the next hour, but really get them talking with just some question prompts, because as you will see, they are really the experts in this area. So with that, Rebecca, maybe I can ask you to kick us off. I find that often the best way to understand what Inner City Law Center is doing is to hear about our clients and our cases. So maybe you can start with a story of a case or a client that can sort of set the frame, and then we'll jump into the details of the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. I've been thinking about a recent case that we worked on. Our team represented a client who he had been receiving Social Security disability benefits. He had worked for decades, and then due to an injury, he wasn't able to work anymore. He applied for the benefits. He was approved for them. And then he came to us after his benefits were terminated. So that means, he stopped receiving his monthly payments. He didn't have any other source of income. And then in addition to that, Social Security, we call them Social Security, it's the Social Security Administration, told him he owed them about $80,000, sent a collection notice in the mail saying, please send us a check for $80,000, sir, you owe us money. And I mean, $80,000 is a lot of money. Like for any of us, that would be kind of an inconceivable amount to receive. And you can imagine the amount of stress this put someone under. I mean, he'd been living under the weight of this stress at the time he got to us. It had affected his physical health. It had affected his mental health. It was affecting his relationships with his family members, just because he was kind of, had this on his back the whole time. And, we looked at his case and it was just wrong. SSA Social Security was just wrong. They had cut off his benefits and told him he owed this money on a completely mistaken belief or a misunderstanding of the facts, really. So they believed in this case that the client had been receiving workers' compensation payments, which if he had would mean, it would lower how much he could get from Social Security. That's true. That's a rule. But they thought he'd been receiving it for this whole 6-year period. And as it turned out, he hadn't gotten any workers' compensation. He wasn't entitled to it during that time. He hadn't received a single payment. There was no evidence or anything indicating anywhere that he'd ever received one of these payments. It wasn't even clear how this conclusion had been reached. And he'd already been, he's a very diligent and organized person. He had all of his records. He tried for about a year to correct Social Security. He'd sent them documents. He sent them his workers' compensation attorney's contact information. He went to the local office a number of times. He called them, tons of times and just could not get it corrected. Just, the situation stayed the same. So that's when he came to us. We represented him in a hearing, and the judge, we presented all of the evidence. We made it really clear what had occurred, what hadn't occurred. And the judge agreed with us. Social Security was wrong. He didn't owe any of this money. And in fact, Social Security owed our client money for some of the time period. It had been, it turned a massive debt into money they should have been paying him. And, what would this client have done without an attorney in this case? He'd reached the end of what he felt he was able to do on his own. And, would this really, I thought, clear error have been corrected? I don't think so. Not without an attorney, not with someone who could present the case really clearly to the judge and, do that work necessary to show the rules and the evidence and make it, essentially right this wrong. And that's just one example of many of the kinds of cases we have.
Great. Can you also share a little bit, Rebecca, about what sorts of benefits Inner City Law Center assists folks with?
Well, inner city generally, we have lots of teams that work on public benefits issues. We represent on issues for people who are trying to access Social Security benefits. So it could be benefits based on disability. It also could be individuals who are retirees and are having a problem accessing benefits. We also have a team, the Homeless Veterans Team, that specifically represents veterans experiencing homelessness and accessing VA benefits. They're going to be hosting our next On the Ground in November. And then we also have some teams that do work in other sorts of general public benefits that people can access. Our team, those of us here today, we represent primarily in two kinds of benefits: Social Security benefits that are based on disability, and a state program called CAPI, which stands for Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants, which is a program available to assist immigrants who are not able to work. It's something that is pretty unique. It doesn't exist in other states. It's great California has it. So one part of our team represents clients in administrative hearings. That's our main work. We do a lot of, other work also advocating with Social Security and interesting in different creative ways, but most of it is bringing cases to an administrative hearing with the judge and asking for a good decision for our client. We have another side of our team that has been sort of working to leverage our expertise in Social Security to make sure as many community members in Los Angeles can access those benefits as possible. So as part of that, we support a countywide program called SEABEST, which is part of the Department of Health Services in LA County. And we assist them in their program to help individuals apply for benefits and document their cases. And we're sort of behind the scenes, supporting them on whatever they need to be able to do that really effectively.
Great. So let me I can pull you guys in on this next question. It's something I hear a lot from folks, right? People are struggling with some disability and living on the streets, and we've got this Social Security system that's supposed to be assisting them. Why does someone need an attorney? Like, they're entitled to that benefit. Why does an attorney need to come in and help? So I don't know if there's some examples of cases or some general commentary you want to make about that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about for our audience about why an attorney is needed.
I can jump on that. In a perfect world, you wouldn't need an attorney to access those benefits. I think we all on the team wish that it was much more accessible and intuitive and easy, but unfortunately, the system is very complicated and tends to be set up to deny people benefits. So our clients typically need us to represent them in their hearings, but they also need us for more general advocacy as well. So for example, one client I can think of was a client who during the course of the time her application was pending in front of Social Security, her medical condition worsened, and or at least it became diagnosable that she had metastatic breast cancer. And so Social Security, kind of the way that they looked at her file was, this is not a terminally ill person. And so the attorney on the team had to call them and call them and call them to provide evidence and show, in fact, she now very clearly should be found disabled and receive disability benefits. For whatever reason, Social Security made it unbelievably difficult for that to happen. And so, different members of the team, between the attorney and the paralegal and supervising staff, we called more than probably 24 times to communicate with Social Security. And the average client of ours doesn't have the bandwidth to do that kind of follow-up. And of course, none of that follow-up should have been needed. They should have just paid the case. But because they didn't, the attorney on the team just had to keep trying and trying and trying. So sometimes we do, hearing work, and sometimes we just have to kind of keep hammering against Social Security until they follow their own rules.
Yeah, so Social Security is a program for individuals with disabilities, but acts as if none of the people that they serve actually have disabilities. On top of, individuals like the one that Eve was mentioning, with physical impairments, we also serve clients with mental health impairments. And I think those cases can be especially challenging for those claimants to navigate on their own. I can think of 2 clients offhand. For the first one, I'll call her Ms. L. I had met her pre-COVID, so in person, and she definitely presented as anxious when I first met with her. She needed some reassurance to even sit down with me and talk with me, and she had been diagnosed with severe anxiety with psychosis. And, luckily our intake meeting, we were able to get all the information we needed, her current medical providers, and, the intake appointment went well. And I think we established good rapport with her. But in the run up to her hearing, which is a period that could take over a year before a hearing is scheduled, we would lose contact with her. So she experienced homelessness shortly after our intake meeting. So it was primarily phone calls and emails in which we would try to reach her. And oftentimes, I wouldn't get a call back, or her phone line was disconnected. And I'd come to find out that she had actually been destroying her phone that she had because she, was afraid of what was coming through on the other end. And at one point, after I had called her and left her a message, she wrote me an email and said that she saw that I was calling, but she was too afraid to pick up the phone. So during this period in which we were representing her, we were collecting medical records, and she had a hearing scheduled. So, we submitted all of this to the judge. And this was part of our argument that her anxiety was so severe that she wasn't able to communicate with people who were working for her. So someone who we had established a good rapport with. And luckily, the judge agreed with us that she was so, severely disabled that she wouldn't be able to hold a full-time job. And he approved her case without a hearing. And so that's one client. Of another one, I will call her Ms. C. So similar to Ms. L, she was very young, probably one of my youngest clients, 19 years old at the time of intake. And she had been living with her family at the time that we had an intake. But during the course of our representation, we would lose contact with her because she would run away. And her family didn't know where she was. Her social worker would lose contact with her. And what we would eventually do is just, have the hearing. The hearing would be coming up. And so we would have to tell the judge, this is what's happening. We can't reach our client, but here are the medical records that we have that we were able to gather. And we think this is consistent with her depressive disorder with psychosis, which was what she had been diagnosed with. And so for the first hearing, we requested a postponement, which is not a matter of right for Social Security. A judge doesn't have to grant a postponement, but luckily this judge did. And so we had another hearing scheduled this past January in which, we were able to find out that the client actually was incarcerated for acting erratically in the Long Beach boardwalk shortly before her hearing. And then she was released to where no one knew where she was But then finally, we were able to find out that she was in a involuntarily confined in a mental health facility afterwards. So that had showed that her health had so severely decompensated. And of course, that was, bad news for her health, but at least she was getting treatment. And we were able to tell the judge that this is also another sign that, she is eligible for these benefits. And so this judge was able to approve her case on just based off of the medical records as well. But I think about these two clients and the difficulties that they would have had they not had an advocate to be able to show up to their hearings and to basically, make the case for them when they weren't able to be there, because oftentimes Social Security is just closing these cases or dismissing them if there's not enough evidence or if they're not showing up for appointments.
Lily, can you repeat what you said? Sorry, Rebecca, I see you're trying to jump in, but can you repeat what you said at the outset? Because I wrote down the sentence, but I want to hear you say it again, because I think it struck me as sort of epitomizing how the system seems to be operated.
Yeah, so what I said was Social Security runs their programs for individuals with disabilities, but acts as if none of the people they're serving actually have disabilities.
Right.
And, we definitely see the challenges that clients with disabilities are facing in navigating the system on their own.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a thing that's important to understand is that these are not outlier cases. These are not the exceptions. This is what happens pretty consistently to clients. We know that from, we collaborate with advocates in California and across the country, and we know that this is the way the system is, and that's because the systems our country has set up to serve who are our community's most vulnerable residents. We're set up to exclude people. That is how the Social Security disability system was set up. The rules and procedures are along those lines. They're not designed to get as many eligible people in the door. They're designed to find people who are not eligible and exclude them. And so because it was set up that way, it works really well at excluding people. And, I think a lot about, if you think about benefits, which were set up that sort of disproportionately are targeted towards middle income households or upper income households. So think about something like, a 529 educational savings plan or setting up an IRA. If any of you've done that, it's really easy. You just go online and, you can set it up in 10 minutes. It's just set up. And these are benefits. I mean, these are benefits the government's providing. They're foregoing tax revenue in order to enable us to save for education for our children, to save for retirement for ourselves. And those systems are really accessible and really easy. They are, you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. I think we're going to share actually a link to an article from The Atlantic that talks a lot about this and gives those as examples and about, how we ended up, where we are at with this system. So because of this complexity in this system, I mean, that's why our legal representation is so important. And it really leads to much better outcomes for our clients. So just to give people an example, if an individual goes in and applies on their own for Social Security benefits or, applies at all, when they first apply, only about 30% of the people who apply are approved. So 70% are denied, just, off the top. So then if that same client appeals and then goes before a judge, if they go before that judge without an attorney, if they go unrepresented, they are approved at about a 40% rate. If that same client gets an attorney and is represented, that increases their chances quite a bit. The national numbers are that about 60% of represented clients at Social Security hearings get approved. And if you have Inner City Law Center, I mean, on our team representing you, your chances of getting approved go up quite a bit. We have about an 87% approval rate at hearing for a client. So, we know that concretely having our team represent you dramatically improves that client's chance of getting approved for benefits and getting entitled. It's a really concrete representation of why our legal representation matters quite a lot.
Can I just, I see you're about to say something, but can I just ask, let me repeat those numbers for our audience. Rebecca, you can tell me if I got it right. But what I heard you say is that for people who are at the hearing stage, of this, right? So they've applied and been denied, now they're appealing it. About 40% of people who have no representation, don't have a lawyer representing them, are successful at that stage.
That's right. Yeah.
About 60% of those who have a lawyer representing them are successful at that stage.
Yeah.
And 87% of our clients who we represent at that stage were successful with. So that shows both the incredible effectiveness of your team, but also the effectiveness of lawyers more generally, right? Even the jump from 40 to 60 is really substantial. Sorry, if you were trying to get in on something, I think.
Oh, I was going to say that, you know, in a lot of ways, I think the success rate of the team is even more impressive because we take almost all clients that are referred to us. And so many of our clients have both mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And having the two combined makes a person's Social Security case more difficult. But we still have a very high success rate. You know, we also have, I think Lily was mentioning, many of our clients don't have regular access to phones or email. So it can be, or they may not have, you know, a stable mailing address if they're unhoused. And so it can be very difficult to stay in contact with clients, which creates a lot of problems in representation potentially. We also have a lot of clients who aren't getting as much medical care as probably would best support their disability case, even though they are disabled. So there's a lot of different reasons, and a lot of our clients have significant mental illness that can affect their ability to have, you know, professional relationships that are successful. So I think the team as a whole, despite having some of those additional challenges, it's really amazing what the work they all do, what, you know, the success that's accomplished.
Great. Can one of you talk a bit about how this work has changed over the last 18 months with COVID?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, Social Security offices, so these field offices that are in every community, they have been closed since March of 2020 for in-person meetings since then. And there's no real concrete plans for reopening the offices. Hearings are now done remotely, but this means that somebody who has an initial application just to apply for benefits, which there usually isn't too much legal assistance for, cannot get assistance with a Social Security representative in person. So it usually requires them to phone in their application. An SSI application generally can't be completed online. I had a client who I was representing at hearing, and during the pendency of her case, she turned 65. So I encouraged her to file an old age application for SSI. And this should have been an easy process. This should have been resolved in one in-person appointment. But since offices were closed, I told her I'd help her set up an appointment with the local office. That ultimately took over 6 phone calls. When I reached a representative, that's not including the times in which we got the busy signals or in which we just couldn't get through. And so they would, you know, keep scheduling appointments for her to have the appointment or application taken over the phone. And, you know, those phone calls would never go through. Those interviews would never go through. So we had to keep following up. This has made it challenging for people to just even apply for benefits during COVID. And, you know, for her case, even once she got an application accepted over the phone, they requested her to send in her, you know, important documents through the mail, including an original marriage certificate, which we are discouraging clients to do just because field offices oftentimes lose important vital documents. And I had to escalate that issue to a supervisor. And ultimately, they ended up accepting a photocopy in her case. But it is definitely more challenging now for somebody to even apply for benefits due to COVID and office closures.
Yeah, I mean, there's another case we're assisting with that is just like that, where the client, Social Security requested that the client mail in his green card, his lawful permanent resident card. So a really important document that it's very hard to replace and you do not want to lose at any point. They requested in May that he mail it in. And even though National Social Security had sent out guidance well before that local offices actually shouldn't be doing this. They said very clearly, do not do this. Do not request. We don't have a mail processing system to handle this, so don't do this. But someone at the local office said to send it in. This was the only way he was going to get approved for benefits, and so he sent in his card. And now they say they can't find it. They're like, well, I don't know. Maybe we'll send someone in the office to go try to sort it out. I mean, there's just not there's not a post-COVID system for any of this, and it's causing quite a lot of problems.
So let me take us up a little bit to a bigger picture question, which is, and for our audience, I'll say that the biggest reason why we have a homelessness crisis in Los Angeles that we do at the moment is because since 2000, the median rents in LA County have gone up by 54%, and median renter incomes have only gone up by 16%. So whatever people struggle with, as we all struggle with things as we go through our lives, so many more people are now doing that in an environment where they're barely able to pay the rent. And so when something goes wrong, they're ending up on the streets or not able to get back into housing. And when you think about that dichotomy between the rents going up and the incomes not going up nearly as much, there's two ways you can tackle that from a policy standpoint or from a services standpoint. One is to try to bring down the rents and have more affordable housing. And the other is just push up the incomes so that people can afford those rents more. Can you talk a little bit about how our Social Security work and maybe the SEABEST program more generally sort of fits into that broader approach to how homelessness is being tackled?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. That, that connecting people to benefits is really an essential strategy as part of our homelessness strategy in LA County to, narrow the gap between income and rent. And so this is the world that we really operate in, where we're really part of a larger strategy in the county to help individuals get access to Social Security benefits or other income that they might, that might be accessible to them. And we work together with a network of agencies to, work on all of that in a coordinated way, right? So we're putting all these strategies together. And I think it's useful to, I was sort of sitting back and reflecting the other day. I started at Intercity 8 years ago. I started as a staff attorney. And so I had clients walking in, my office every day with a whole variety of different legal problems. And one of the most challenging things I had to do quite a bit is I had clients who came in who needed help with applying for Social Security benefits, for exactly these kind of benefits. And there was nowhere I could refer them. There was no, apart from someone going to a Social Security office, which, they could get limited help with, there was no program that existed. And these were for clients who, did not speak English as a first language, had, potentially intellectual disabilities. I had many clients who really had a hard time completing any paperwork on their own or understanding, notices that were at the level of reading ability that Social Security notices are. It was just someone who, I met with a lot of clients who I knew it was going to be really hard and maybe impossible for them to get the application in on their own. And there was nowhere to send them. And I mean, this is a lot of people across the county that are in this situation. And so when, with the supportive measure H funding, and LA County started a program called SEABEST, which is countywide. It sits at the Department of Health Services, and they're assisting clients apply for benefits. And we got on board with it, early on, with helping them build up the program and make it strong. And it's a dramatic difference. And it's something that I think, when you're just kind of not in the midst of it all, it wouldn't be visible to people that this has happened. But there's a lot of pieces like that. This is one piece that Measure H, I think, really made possible and is concretely helping thousands of people a year.
So, how does that play out in terms of individual folks who receive this? Can you talk a little bit about one of you about sort of what is the, what's the impact when somebody gets these benefits? How much are they getting, and sort of, how does that play out with their families, with the communities where they're located? What does that look like?
I can speak to that. I think a question related to this was just in the chat as well. So the national SSI rate that folks across the country get is, I believe, $794. In California, we have the state pushes it up a little bit, so it's $951 or 54 for an individual in California to receive SSI. When you get SSI, you no longer get a program some folks may be aware of called General Relief, which is $221 a month. And your amount of food stamps is dramatically decreased. So $954 is the entirety of what you get. So it is not a significant amount of money at all. But even that being said, I think there is a real ripple effect when someone is awarded SSI, or at least there can be, because I think, our experience with clients and for folks who have been doing legal services work, I think we see over time that a lot of times the difference between whether or not someone becomes homeless or not is if they have people in their social network who can give them a place to stay or give them some money to make rent. If you don't have folks in your network who can do that for you, you do become homeless. That's just the really awful reality of the United States today. And so when someone gets SSI, even though it's not nearly enough for someone to be able to live comfortably, at least there's some income security. So you could have, potentially, hopefully get into stable housing. And then if your loved one is no longer able to afford their housing, they can potentially stay with you, or you can potentially help bolster other people. It also, by the federal government paying out SSI, it brings money into some of our most vulnerable communities, and it puts money into the community. So there are ripple effects, in addition to for the individual, even though it's, SSI, if you, best case scenario, you get approved for SSI, you still really have to struggle to make it, unfortunately, given how much the benefits are.
But the benefits, I just wanted to chime in, but the benefits are definitely helpful. And I think, going back to what Rebecca was saying about the Measure H funding, I mean, with the advocacy that we're able to do to help individuals get benefits, we've also have been able to leverage what we know by training the county and nonprofit organizations in LA County to help more people get into benefits on an individual level.
So there was a question in the chat about how people connect with our services. And the answer, I think accurately, that Jim put in was that most of the clients that come in, certainly for the hearings that we do, come in through the SEABEST program. Is there a link that we can throw? I know we have a number of service providers on the session with us today. I don't know if there's a link that we can throw to the SEABEST, to how they connect with the SEABEST. Would that be great to throw up? But is there anything else we want to say about sort of how people connect with our services beyond that? Or is that really the best thing, is for people to connect through SEABEST?
We can get the information. There's a general number that advocates can call and then connect in and find out how they can start connecting their clients. Getting clients into the SEABEST program really is the best way, because they're a full service program for individuals, because they'll both, connect them to housing if they are experiencing homelessness. They will figure out what kind of support they need, with an application, or do they need a specialized, they need legal representation, and that's the best way in, because they'll get to the right place, and so that the right people get to us. But if we're not the most appropriate, person to help them, they'll get them to that appropriate person.
Great. So sticking on the sort of the big picture sort of question I was asking, another big picture question from my perspective is why is this system such a mess? And I think some of it probably goes to, Rebecca, what you were saying earlier about sort of it was set up to make sure people who shouldn't get in don't get in, as opposed to making sure the right people who should access these benefits get them. But do you have other thoughts about, how come this is such a disaster? How come we have so many people struggling and need such advocacy to get what they should be entitled to, just on the basis of what their situation is?
I can try and speak to that. I think I think it is a complex answer. To start with, our government funding is not directed towards providing adequate, the social safety net is not prioritized, I would say, relative to how money is allocated to other aspects of government. And so the Social Security Administration, in this case, they're underfunded. They don't have the sufficient number of employees to do the work that's required for a system that helps millions and millions of people. Social Security, nearly everyone is going to interact with the Social Security Administration in their life, either for disability benefits or for retirement or for both. And so they have a huge workload without enough funding to accomplish the work efficiently in a lot of cases. I also think that the system has evolved over time into an extremely complex one that is not designed, as we've talked about, it's sort of designed to siphon people off as opposed to siphon people in. I also think that there's sort of a misplaced focus on fraud and the perception of people receiving benefits who are not deserving. I used to work at Social Security for a long time, and so when people would hear that I work there, sometimes people would ask me questions about retirement, or they would, ask different things. My mom is having a problem. What can I do? But oftentimes people would sort of ask me about, well, don't you think there's a lot of people who are trying to cheat the system? And actually, there was a time I was coming to work at Inner City, and there was someone in the elevator with me who was going to a different floor, and she asked me where I worked and what I was doing, and I told her, and she sort of said, like, oh, there's just way too many people trying to get on benefits. There's just all these bums trying to get on benefits. And, that is not uncommon perspective to hear from folks. But really all I could say to her is, if you became disabled or someone that you loved became disabled, would you want them to be able to live a dignified life without worrying that they're going to be on the streets? And of course she said yes, because it's, she did, that's what she would want for herself. And I think there is oftentimes a real difficulty in this society or this culture with saying something that I want someone else should also have. Like, there's a real lack of empathy and a lack of compassion for other people that, many, many people care about kind of their small individual world, and they think that somehow there's this larger world that isn't deserving of the same treatment that they would want for themselves. And that fundamentally causes a lot of this inequity. I also think there's a lot of prejudice and racialized ideas about public benefits that has been weaponized to reduce the benefits programs. And so sort of all of that combined results in a really dysfunctional system.
So that's not a particularly optimistic view of how we've gotten here. Unfortunately, I think pretty accurate. But there is some optimism in terms of some reforms to the system that are being pretty actively pursued and talked about. So can one of you share a little bit for our audience of what's going on that front? And in particular, it's something that, and we'll come back to this at the end again, but it's something that I'm hoping that our audience can be knowledgeable about and weigh in support of with their electeds or wherever it is that people do their advocacy. So can one of you talk a little bit about that effort and what it is?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. There's actually currently legislation going through Congress called the SSI Restoration Act. And it kind of goes into the benefits amount that Eve was mentioning earlier. It proposes a lot of changes to a system that hasn't had any updates for the past 40 years since it was enacted in the 1970s. So, for example, when Eve mentioned that in California, somebody's getting about $950, and if they're an individual and single, that benefit level is something that, is a monthly income that they can get that's supposed to cover all of their basic needs. It's difficult to supplement that with other money. So according to current rules, an individual can't get more than $20 a month without that benefit level being reduced. That $20 amount hasn't been updated since the 1970s. And of course, we know that the cost of living has increased, more than 5 times the amount that it cost back in the 70s. So there are badly needed updates to the system and the rules that are currently in place. And the SSI Restoration Act is out there to provide these updates and could use some support from the public.
Great. So, Rebecca, can you talk a little bit about ways people can plug in and help either by supporting that effort or other things that people listening can do to support this work and support these clients?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, stemming from what Lily was talking about for the SSI Restoration Act, you can call your representative and talk to them about supporting it. It can be, that is something that's very current, and there's some energy surrounding, I think during the pandemic, people became more aware of how sort of fractured our safety net is, and that we need to strengthen it to take care of people in our communities. But they need to hear from you. I mean, they need to hear from constituents, or it's not going to be a priority amongst many different priorities. Also inner city, we have pro bono programs. We always encourage attorneys who want to get involved with our pro bono work to reach out to us and sign up to work on cases. That's been a really effective way for us to expand the amount of clients that we're able to represent through pro bono representation. Of course, as always, we ask you to contribute to inner city. I mean, we would love to continue to expand this work and be able to represent additional clients, but we need your funds to be able to continue to do that, right? And you can also join our inner city mailing list, join our Facebook page. We put out updates about things like the SSI Restoration Act or other programs we have or services we have or changes that may be happening. We've put a bunch of links in the chat here. We really encourage you to read them. I mean, we also, on a local level, we really encourage you to support county Measure H and the prevention and the prevention measures and the other programs that have been put in place to address homelessness. I know it can be frustrating, because when you're, like I said, when you're on the outside, and you're like, what is changing? I don't understand. But I can say from the inside that a lot has changed, that there really are concrete things that we've built up that are helping people and that are, moving the needle and that are going to continue to, but this stuff takes time and it needs more time to continue working.
So in a moment, I'm going to move to questions. So for those of you listening or watching, please throw your questions in that Q&A. If you've asked something in the chat that you don't feel like has been fully answered, or you'd like to have us talk about more, feel free to throw it in the Q&A again. But before I move to that and take some questions that way, let me just ask if anybody has a client story that maybe we could share before we move to the questions. Again, as I said at the outset, for me, it's hearing what the clients are struggling with and what we're able to do with their case that really illustrates both the problems with the system and the challenges our clients face, and also the role that Inner City Law Center is able to play in tackling those things and helping people with those issues. So I don't know if maybe before we move to Q&A, any of you have one more client story that we could share before we move to that.
Yeah, so honestly, Adam, the most rewarding cases that I've worked on is when, on top of getting somebody benefits, we see that there's another element that's falling into place for them. So somebody that I can think of that we recently won his case at hearing. So he's getting the full SSI amount of about $950 a month. At the same time, it also happened to just work out with timing. He's off of the Section 8 waiting list. Before, he was staying in a PATH shelter, a group shelter. PATH is one of the nonprofit agencies that we've worked closely with. And they got him to get off of the Section 8 waiting list and be housed, permanently housed. And he's now in senior housing where, you know, with Section 8, the good thing about that is we know that they're not taking more than a third of his monthly income in rent. So while he's not getting rich off of these benefits, but he now has about $600 a month to spend on other basic necessities, to spend on a bed for his degenerative disease, you know, a more comfortable bed for his medical conditions, and to spend on food and other necessities. So it's those cases that I find to be the most rewarding, because as we've talked about, you know, the benefits levels amounts are not sufficient. I think, you know, with somebody with disabilities, I think of public benefits as something that is, you know, necessary, but not sufficient often to get somebody, you know, off the streets and housed. And we at Inner City don't work in a silo. The public benefits team here does not work in a silo. And we know that we have community partners and we need the assistance and very much appreciate the assistance of community partners and getting a lot of our clients housed and into a better situation.
Great. So I love that example, Lily, because it really shows that we're part of a larger ecosystem, that the other pieces have to really work as well. And, you know, we're plugging in as a piece of that to help solve problems. So let me move to a few of the questions, and hopefully I can navigate these electronically. But one of them, I'll just read the, hold on, it keeps disappearing. I assume that moves to the answered. If someone gets approved based on an initial application, how long does that usually take? And do applicants get back benefits from the date of the application?
I can speak to that. You want to, Rebecca? Okay. So the process, it has actually changed a fair amount due to COVID. Sort of up is down. It in some ways is actually faster since COVID. Unfortunately, the reason that it's faster is because the offices have been closed, and so many clients, so many people applying for benefits don't have internet access. They don't have a lot of ability to file applications. So many, I think there's estimates that I think it's around 100,000, excuse me, 100,000 fewer applications have been filed during COVID than normally would have been filed. So that means those folks will permanently not get those benefits. Not a good thing for all of those folks. The positive is for people who have managed to get an application filed, the waiting time is less. So it's usually around 3 or 4 months from the time you apply until you find out if you were approved or denied. If you're denied and you appeal that, it's usually another, 4 to 6 months, somewhere in that range. And then if you are denied at that level, you appeal and go in front of an administrative law judge, which is where most of our cases are. And that used to be, you could be waiting for a year to 2.5 years. There has been a dramatic decrease in the wait time since COVID. And there's sort of complex reasons for that, but it's now, potentially people could have a hearing within 6 months or so. And for SSI, you do get back benefits from the time that you apply, and for SSDI, it can go back a little bit further, but you can't get back benefits like from 20 years ago unless you've appealed. You're never going to get back benefits from 20 years ago. Potentially, the most you could kind of get is maybe 5 or 6 years. If you went to federal court and got remanded and went back and forth, you could potentially get more, but most people get a smaller amount of back benefits.
Are you aware of programs similar to the SEABEST program or the work that we do that are up in the Oakland, Alameda area?
There is a similar program in Alameda County that is through 2 agencies, Homeless Advocacy Center and Bay Area Legal Aid, where they assist clients with applying for benefits all the way up through appeals. I don't at hand have the referral information, but I believe that by contacting one of those agencies, they could find out, how someone might be able to get into those programs. And
I know the person who asked that question, so I can follow up if they didn't catch those names. So another question that was asked was, and I think Lily, you spoke about this, if somebody gets more than $20, it offsets what they get in Social Security benefits. Is that true if somebody gets money from one of the universal basic income pilots? And if so, are you aware of any conversations to exempt that income from Social Security?
That's an excellent question.
I will take that.
I'll
I
give
will
it
take
to-
that question. So there have been a few universal basic income pilots. There was a big one in Stockton that had a really interesting report about it. And so I've looked at this pretty closely because it's something that there's going to be one in Compton. There's a few other examples happening in LA County, I think, right now. And what is the reality is that, and this is just an example of the exclusionary nature of SSI, is that SSI is fundamentally designed that if you receive any other income from any other source, it will cause your benefits to be decreased. Social Security is a program of last resort, which in benefits world, that means go use that other money and come back to us when you no longer have it. Like, use something else. You can only come to us if you really literally have nothing else to rely on. And so that's true for universal basic income too, that that would count as income for people. And if someone was on SSI, their benefits would get reduced because of it.
Okay. Somebody put in the chat that they have a client who applied for disability 5 years ago and was denied. He would like to reapply. Does there need to be a recency to how recently he was denied for him to connect with SEABEST or ultimately get referred to Intercity Law Center?
No, there's no requirements about anything like that. And this is one of the reasons I was saying it's great to get the person connected to SEABEST, because if it turns out that the best course forward is for that person to get really good assistance in applying again and maybe get approved without a need for a hearing, SEABEST would be who assists with that. And so they figure out what the best course forward is for each particular client, and then make sure that they have assistance in doing that.
Okay. Someone asked a question about, can anyone at ICLC help me get my Section 8 voucher reinstated? Is this an area you work in? I assume that probably wouldn't be something that your team would do directly. But it might be something that our PEP team could assist with if they qualified. So you should definitely contact the office, and you can say you were on this presentation and somebody mentioned that maybe the PEP team, PEHP team might be able to help with that. And we could certainly take a look at your situation and perhaps assist with that, or connect you perhaps with somebody else who could assist if for some reason we can't. All right, let's see here. Just flipping through the questions. Well, someone is waiting for their appeal. Are they receiving temporary funds to help them with any expenses such as food, housing, etc.?
If the question is through Social Security, you want to take that, Lily?
Yeah, generally no, not through Social Security. But most of our clients who come to us and are waiting for their appeal to be processed are receiving general relief, which is that $220 a month. And also food stamps. So to help with food and, generally with housing, then, hopefully there's a Section 8 pending, or, at least they're on some affordable housing lists.
Yeah.
So can I chime in on that, Adam? Because it's an area that I get particularly irate about. So, to apply for SSI, you have to have less than $2,000 in all available money, 401k, anything else available to you. So under $2,000, right? So to apply, just to start out through the door. We heard that only about 30% of people get approved, right? So that means a lot of people are having to wait for a hearing. Before the pandemic, the wait for a hearing was, almost verging on 2 years. So what that leads you to know is that, someone has to be pretty much at the state where if they're housed, they're going to be evicted in a couple months to apply for SSI. And what do you think happens in that 2-year period where they're waiting for a hearing? It's incredibly hard on clients. It's incredibly unfair. And, I've sat with clients after they want a hearing where they've gone through an incredible hardship, during that 2-year wait, and they're getting their back benefits. And they're like, I'm glad I'm getting this money. I really wish I could have just gotten it, at the time. It's an incredible hardship that it just has somehow become normalized, that we're putting people through that have really no other means of support. They've proven that, right? It's pretty awful, actually.
So another question I think is an easy one, because I think the answer is just yes, send them to SEABEST. But someone says, I have a client that is positive and doctors refusing to check the disabled box on the diagnosis, even though the client had brain surgery, recent stroke, back surgery. Is this the sort of client you could assist in applying for SSI? So I guess the answer is connect that person with the SEABEST program so that they can make sure they get assistance. And if a lawyer is what's appropriate for that, then that would come to us. Okay. Let me ask about one of the questions that was in the chat earlier, or one of the comments that was in the chat. I don't know if it was a question or a comment, but someone was asking about the increase in homelessness numbers in California and questioning whether or not generosity of benefits or lack of enforcement of where people can sleep or those sorts of things is a contributing factor to why we have a lot of folks who are homeless in California. I can speak to that, or I'm wondering what you guys would say in response to that.
Do you want to start us out, Adam, and then we can?
Sure, I'll start.
Yeah.
I guess I'd start by saying two things. One is that there's three things. One is that there's really very little evidence that people move because of generosity of benefits. The social science research that has looked at this just hasn't found there's much a moving of that. And if you think about the scale of the difference, I mean, Eve, you were mentioning, it's $200 more to be in California, what you get from Social Security than what you get someplace else. Right? That's not a big motivator to move from Texas to California for $200 more a month in general, you would think. And the evidence seems to bear that out. The second thing I'd say is that if you look at the demographics of who is homeless in Los Angeles and how long they have been in Los Angeles or in California, it pretty much almost exactly mirrors the demographics of the housed folks who are in Los Angeles or in California. So there's lots of people who are not from California, either recently or a long time ago, but it's pretty much in the same proportion as people who are in housing or people who are on the streets. So again, that suggests that there aren't large numbers of folks flowing. And I can't remember what the third brilliant thing I was going to say was. So I'll stop with those two and ask, we can leave it there, or I don't know if any of you want to add on to that in response to the question.
I mean, I would say that, we get to know our clients really well. And at least, our experience is that our clients are, LA County long-term residents. These are individuals who grew up here, were born here, have, this is where, family is, or it's not, that isn't really the case. And, because these are clients who are, like Lily had mentioned, like they're highly vulnerable in a lot of different ways. And so, and many of them, like, even just like having the capacity to like just as an example, when clients are approved, it may sometimes, because the cost of living is lower in other places, it could sometimes make sense that a client could potentially look at other areas of the country once approved. It's a federal benefit. They can receive it in any state, and maybe, but like these are clients who have long-term roots here. And this is, the only familiarity and comfort and support they have is here. And so, it's not, in essence, I don't think the federal benefit is enough to draw people, especially because it's quickly eaten up by, as we all know, the cost of housing, and that's why we really need to be focusing on creating more affordable housing in California, making it more accessible.
One of the questions that was in the chat was also about language barriers and whether or not that's something that we see where people have barriers with accessing Social Security benefits because of language challenges.
Who would like to take that one? I can. Social Security Administration does not translate any of their forms into any language apart from Spanish. That's the first thing. And only some of the forms are translated into Spanish. So just at the outset, you go to their website, you're not gonna, and that's where a lot of the information is, you're not gonna find information in other languages. And even just applying through the paper forms, you're not also probably gonna be able to get an application form that has questions in a language you understand. There's not a guarantee you'll have someone who speaks your language necessarily when you call an office. There really is not, it is a significant barrier, especially in a place like LA County where, I've often talked to people where, like where we're going into a hearing and I have a client who has operated in LA County and maybe they speak English as a second language, but like I ask people, I'm like, well, okay, so you took Spanish in college, right? are you prepared to represent yourself in a hearing before an administrative law judge about a complex area of law in Spanish? And I'm like, yeah, there's a difference, right? There's a difference with being able to work on a job site and speaking enough English in an area you're really familiar with and going into a hearing and doing that. I think people get that right away when they're like, oh yeah, my high school Spanish wouldn't get me very far if I had to argue why I'm eligible for unemployment benefits, you know? But it's just not really an acknowledgement in helping people through it.
So, so we've come to the end of our hour. We want to keep, I know we're maybe be a minute over by the time we're done, but I do want to keep to our time. So let me just say a couple of things in closing. First, I want to thank our panelists for taking the time and for all your work in this area. And so thank you for sharing your expertise today. I also want to thank Kim and Vanessa and Jen in the back end of this to make this all work smoothly. So thank you as well for that. And I want to thank everybody who plugged in and joined us today for coming and learning about our work in this area and more generally about the struggles of our clients in accessing these benefits and trying to lead dignified lives where they're not on the streets and not having to deal with these issues in such a horrendous way as too many folks are at the moment. So just want to thank everybody for your time. We are going to do another of these sessions in November that will focus on our homeless veterans team and the work that they do. So hopefully if you've signed up and gotten here for this one, that you'll get the notices about that as well. And thank you for your time and interest. And thanks again to our panelists.